Story 1. Laugh out loud, never. The world would have to take some severe measures, and that is out of the question for the people who are enjoying the fully paid-for ride. Story 2. Compared to most of human history, we already are unimaginably rich and advanced, and it has done almost nothing to alleviate the separation of mankind into rich and poor. So maybe someday we will fly to the stars and have transporters and replicators, but even then somewhere on Earth, some malnourished orphans will drink from a muddy puddle in the road. Story 3, maybe. Star Trek's utopian society exists because of several factors, including a technological explosion that eliminates the concept of need and forces people to evolve culturally and psychologically. In short, yes, but only if humans change what defines them as human and become something entirely different. Is that possible? It is as possible as it was for my brother, who struggled with heroin addiction, to get clean. We did not think it was possible, but he eventually did. Insist on the impossible, as they say. No, it couldn't because of certain reasons is one opinion, but I will hold on to hope because the only person I am hurting with doubt is myself. Story 4. People think space exploration is a waste of time. Star Trek is about boldly going where no one has gone before. People cannot look 2 inches past their own nose, even for the betterment of society. Story 5. Right now, in my home city, I can go to a public park, breathe air I did not pay for, sit on a bench I did not buy, and drink water from a fountain that is not metered. We can do all this because we chose to. But can we extend this to beds, showers, laundry, clothing, and food? Part of it is limited resources, particularly energy. We would need energy to be much cheaper than it is now. Part of it is limited social trust. We fear that if people could live a minimalist life funded by taxpayers, they would be lazy and not contribute in any way. We worry that someone who does so is worthless, not simply needing time to recover. I suspect we can fix the technical issues around energy. I am not sure about the social trust. Story 6. No way. Humanity is getting the bad ending. Even if we had that technology, ego and narcissism would stop it from reaching the masses. The psychopaths who rule the world have to feel like they are better than everybody else. Story 7. The humans of Star Trek did not live in a utopia. In Star Trek, humanity almost wiped itself out in a world war before the Vulcans arrived. If an alien race showed up on Earth, there would likely be more unity. It would become humans versus aliens instead of Americans versus another country. Story 8. There is a better chance that we are all dead than this occurring. Honestly, I think the ultra-rich would prefer that to a world where everyone is equal. Story 9. We are going in the wrong direction because business owners and investors have been fine-tuning the calculations and decisions that allow them to maximize their own revenues by minimizing those of all their stakeholders, most notably their employees. We are returning to the pharaoh and slave model. Story 10. No, I do not think a post-scarcity Star Trek future will ever happen. The Star Trek universe eliminates scarcity through technologies like matter-energy conversion, holodecks, and limitless power from dark matter reactors. These are pure science fiction. There is nothing in current physics that suggests infinite energy is possible. Space, time, and energy are finite. That sets hard limits on what any civilization can do. Even if humanity somehow created those miraculous technologies, true post-scarcity would still be impossible. Some forms of scarcity are not technical. They are fundamental. Land on Earth is finite. Time is finite. Human attention and relationships are finite. Not everyone can be part of a famous crew or hold a coveted role. Those opportunities will always be limited. Technology cannot erase competition for status, meaning, or connection. That kind of scarcity never disappears. Story 11. Nope. If there are just 2 people left on Earth, you can bet they will at some point argue over resources, no matter how plentiful. Story 12. There would need to be a war and the wealthy would have to lose. I just do not see it happening. They will never compromise. Story 13. Not as long as wealth exploitation exists. There will always be someone who has way more than everyone else. As long as that person exists, you will never have your utopia. Story 14. No, because even people who claim to be good have a lot of anger in them toward anyone who is not like them. Story 15. Who? All of us? Everyone on Earth? Some people already live that way, and I believe that will expand, but I do not believe it will ever be everyone. Story 16. No, there will always be good versus evil. It is unfortunate because evil often seems to get ahead with less effort. It only takes a few drops of oil to poison the well. Story 17. Sure, maybe we, our grandchildren, nor our grandchildren's grandchildren will ever see that day, but it might quite possibly be plausible. Story 18. According to Star Trek, World War III happens. Humanity was on the brink and realized it needed to get its act together. So it is not too late. Story 19. They only reached it because of a genius and a kindly alien race. They destroyed half the world before that. Story 20. If we do not destroy ourselves with the development of technology, it is inevitable. It has nothing to do with politics. At some point, it will be just the way things are. Story 21. Even the utopia of Star Trek Earth required a global war that annihilated most of humanity to get there. Sadly, I do not see another way. We currently live in a world where the richest 500 to 1,000 people could legitimately make a sizable dent in worldwide food scarcity, help eradicate disease, begin the seeding of universal basic income, and help fund other social programs like the Department of Veterans Affairs, child care, and more. They would all still be billionaires. But here we are with them all chasing some imaginary high score. I really cannot see the world of Star Trek he is attending without some sort of reset. Story 22. If you look at where we are now compared to how things were 100 years ago, and 100 years before that, I think the trajectory of progress will eventually bring us close to something like that. Some places will achieve this sooner than others. Story 23. Only if we invent replicators and antimatter reactors to power them. Basically, you cannot have a post-scarcity society without first eliminating scarcity. Story 24. No, because corporations are duty-bound to prioritize shareholders over ethics or morality. Capitalism breeds inequality and the hoarding of wealth. Story 25. No. If there was no money or scarcity, psychopaths would still hoard resources and exploit people just for the love of the game. Story 26. Yes. In fact, we are closer than we have ever been. I believe that most people are kind and empathetic, but a very small percentage hoard the resources we need to thrive and prosper. Despite their greed, we still protect the vulnerable. And maybe it is just the baby sleeping on me right now, but I have hope for us all. Story 27. We are already there. At least we have the capability. The people in charge just do not want it to happen, as then they would no longer be the people in charge. Story 28. Absolutely not. We are sending people to foreign prisons without due process for lifelong death sentences while applauding genocide. That is in the best countries. We will kill ourselves because the vast majority of us are fools, and the rest are passive. Myself included. We are all going to die, not just literally, but in legacy, and we deserve it. Story 29. No, because of greed. The 10 richest people in the world could solve many of the world's problems. Story 30. No. Humans are too rooted in tribalism, and frankly, the rise of weaponized misinformation does not seem like an easy thing to overcome. Story 31. Give it a few hundred if not 1,000 years and I would reckon the odds are greater than the majority of comments. Despite our preconceptions and biases, humanity has been centralizing to greater and greater degrees, with increasing peace and cohabitation in general. Sure, this might be hard to see in our current position on the graph, but if you zoom out far enough that line only ever trends up, regardless of downtrends on the way. I do believe that a prerequisite to this kind of unification is the eventual dominance of an ideology. Be that Western liberal democracy, Islamic theocracy, or otherwise. I think that barring our extinction, this trend continues and eventually there is some form of a unified humanity, or at least I would like to think so. Story 32. I like how the Orville came by theirs. Once matter generation came into existence, food and object replication devices eliminated the need for money. This meant people transitioned into reputation and contribution-based wealth. It was what you did for humanity that mattered, not how much currency you had. Story 33. I am not saying we will, but is no one aware of what happens during the 21st century of the Star Trek universe? Summary: Bell riots, Second United States Civil War, World War III, nuclear holocaust. Story 34. It is possible. All the ingredients are there. It is just a question of being able to implement them. Very likely, part of the world will be able to attain that level of freedom and luxury while the rest remains in relative squalor. Not because of ability but selfishness, a need to be able to point at someone worse off than you. But as long as we do not destroy ourselves, poison the oceans, or have the plastic in our blood cause strokes at age 25, the march of progress is inevitable and time is unending. Story 35. The peaceful idealists of Star Trek are the descendants of the survivors of a massive genetic engineering war that devastated most of Earth's population. Story 36. Yes, but I think the size of humanity will have to shrink first, and the technology will have to advance further. Not to the point of creating post-scarcity resources even, but the technology needs to develop enough to stabilize the need for workers. We are in flux even now. The world needs to experience a revolution of thought that I cannot see happening through any other means than tragedy. Whether it is a global disaster, a unifying conflict, or a dictatorial ruler willing to reduce humanity, or worse. I do not like the idea I have presented, and I do not wish it, but I do not see a way on our current path to take all of humanity into a post-scarcity future. There is too much attachment to what came before, and too many people are willing to fight harder for it than the rest are willing to fight for an unknown promised future. Story 37. We could probably be there now if we did not have billionaires and multimillionaires. Human greed and sociopathy will never allow it. A billionaire like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos could never spend their money in their lifetime, but they hoard and accumulate it. For what? A high score? Who cares? That is literal money that the rest of us have no access to. It is sequestered away to stroke an ego while the rest of us squabble over the leftovers. Story 38. Unfortunately, no. For years, I have been thinking about how we would get there, not if. End state. More than enough resources for everyone, made available without cost. Current state. More than enough resources for everyone, owned by a small and shrinking number of people, companies, and governments. What it would take to get there. Universal basic income is the minimal condition. Some communities are experimenting with using tax money to buy and distribute excess resources. That will not scale and is far from sufficient in effect or scope. It would require a worldwide rewrite of property rights and a deep form of socialism to reach that starting point. Additionally, overcoming human nature related to equality, competition, tribalism, stereotyping, and greed is necessary unless a police state enforces distribution and retention of these benefits. Story 39. Yes, because what we need will decrease over time. It is inevitable that we will create perfect virtual reality, where everyone can have an oceanfront home. There is infinite space to build because we are not constrained by physics in a virtual world. We are already very close, within decades, to augmented reality glasses that could redefine and augment your physical life with infinite free virtual items. We also have the potential for artificial intelligence to take over labor. Story 40. The way things are going, the future is on track to look much more like Blade Runner than Star Trek, unfortunately. Story 41. People will always want more. Look at the last 50 years. We have gone from being amazed at television to being appalled that Disney Plus has a couple of advertisements. Story 42. I do not think so. I cannot feature a large number of extraterrestrials, if any, living on our planet, much less reaching our planet. But an Earthling can dream, can he not? Story 43. I suspect the closest we will get is a highly effective United Nations that allows certain parts of the world to operate in different ways. There would likely be areas governed by specific faiths, nomadic regions, and tribal areas, but most of the planet would resemble a super eco-friendly version of New York City or the suburbs. The only way to achieve the Star Trek Federation would be through a single culture, which would take tens of generations. Story 44. A vast majority of the world is too resistant to progress for us to advance. People are too blinded by religion or influenced by Cold War-era propaganda to accept peace or progress. They would rather suffer because they were told to be proud of it than look toward their own best interest. Story 45. Remember that they did not reach that point without a lot of loss of life and significant civil unrest. If you want to get there, you will not succeed without toppling the current systems and removing those who benefit from them. Story 46. The current nation-state dominated world we live in, completely captured by a capitalist model, has not been around long in the total history of humanity. Depending on how you place yourself on the political compass, you might think it will only last a little longer, or you might hope it lasts forever. Governments may shift towards a more egalitarian model, or even communism simply because it is the most practical. We really do not and cannot know what the world is going to look like in 100, 500, or 1,000 years. The difference in our society could be greater than the difference between ourselves and the first settlements in Mesopotamia. It will not be in any of our lifetimes, though not by a long shot. Story 47. No, it is highly unlikely. Mostly because at the current rate, the economy will collapse, and immediately after that, the ecology will collapse. We will not be able to recover because all of the easily accessible resources will have already been used. So we will wander around much like we did 100,000 years ago. Story 48. I like the term post-scarcity. The way you get there is by removing the driving factors behind greed. If everyone has free access to much more than they could possibly need, most of the problems of a consumer society go away, and then we can focus on other issues. There will still be sociopaths who won't be satisfied unless they own the most planets, but in a post-scarcity society, it becomes much more obvious that this is a mental illness and, in fact, one of the problems we need to address. Story 49. If we reach post-scarcity, someone will figure out a way to hoard it all anyway. We have the means to be post-scarcity now, we just do not want to be. Story 50. I sincerely hope so because things are far too expensive and nobody gets paid enough to live comfortably, as everyone should be able to buy right. However, I think rigid religious beliefs would forbid that. Story 51. I have a feeling it will be more like The Expanse than Star Trek, unfortunately. Don't get me wrong, I like The Expanse, but I don't like how troubled the future is in The Expanse. However, it is probably the most realistic. In The Expanse, a majority of the jobs are automated, and most people receive universal basic income, but not the universal basic income we want. Story 52. No. I think humanity's collective subconscious has a baseline of necessary misery, and whenever things start to get too good, we self-sabotage to swing the pendulum back in the other direction, forever denying ourselves a near utopia that is fully within our capabilities. Story 53. I think humanity would be much more like The Expanse than Star Trek, moving forward in fits and starts with the best and worst of humanity always in conflict. Story 54. Not even close to it. Capitalism alone will not allow it. Greed, standard of humanity, atom-deep tribalism for just your immediate family. I got mine. On and on. It would take an entire shift in humanity that I can't see ever happening. Just getting the world to unite on anything would be impossible. However you spell his name, go ahead. Yeah, I'll stick with my rock. All the world's religious gods could become an utter reality show. Decree it or proclaim all go to hell or equivalent. People will complain about them not being their real god as they literally look at them. We are in and will always flow towards the cyberpunk dystopia that is meant as a warning, not a guidebook to make it happen. Just without any of the remotely cool ideas of it. Story 55. As long as the baby boomer generation is alive, no. Assuming we do not all die in the coming climate crisis, we might have a chance. It would require a radical change in how we think as a society, and I do not think people are ready for that yet or will be ready anytime soon. Story 56. We are already at the point where you can manufacture basically anything for trivial prices. Instead of selling things at trivial prices, most business focuses on decommodifying commodity goods such as logos and graphic t-shirts, which allows for higher margins. You see this in most sectors. We make extremely large houses so the cost of housing does not plummet. You can cook with the cheapest equipment at restaurant quality, but people spend hundreds on fancy pans. It turns out that people generally do not want everything to be extremely low cost. They want it to be personalized or fancy, and that means we will never reach arbitrarily low prices. If everyone agreed to buy the most cost-effective goods meeting some specification and bought in bulk, you could cut your costs by 80 to 90%. That, to me, is post-scarcity because living on 10% of your salary means that the vast majority of people do not really have issues getting things. Story 57. No, the people running the world inherently thrive on a hierarchy system because at their core they believe themselves to be different and better than everyone else. If they work to create equality, it would break their own self-perception. Story 58. No. Star Trek works because 99% of people do what they are supposed to do. They contribute to society. They do not splurge in excess. They do not commit crimes. In order for a utopian, peaceful, moneyless society to work, everyone has to restrain themselves from things they do not need and must pull their own weight. Story 59. Maybe utopia and peace, but not post-scarcity and no money. If Star Trek was truly post-scarcity, then there would be billions of spaceships flying around the galaxy at warp 9. If that were the case, the Enterprise would be insignificant. Story 60. The Star Trek world went through approximately 30 to 40 years of nuclear holocaust and immense suffering before most of the evil died off and they turned things around. Story 61. Our species is over. Climatologists now say 3 degrees Celsius by 2050, and it will only be getting hotter. 4 degrees Celsius expected by 2100. So no. Story 62. For a select few of us. Those who survive the destruction of Earth will carry on, the extremely wealthy, supported by artificial intelligence, robotics, and possibly a clearly subservient class of humans. Over time, with the rest of humanity having died off, they will be forced to restructure society based on a new baseline. The only survivors will have already overcome the need to produce food, water, and other essentials. Wealth will have become irrelevant after eliminating the underprivileged. So, yes, but not gracefully and not for a particularly deserving subset of our species. Story 63. Elon Musk $394 billion. Mark Zuckerberg $241 billion. Jeff Bezos $228 billion. Larry Ellison $213 billion. Warren Buffett $154 billion. Some people would rather have their delivery people urinate in a bottle than give up $1. Story 64. No. Greed, hate, and fear are built into the deepest parts of our brain. We would have to evolve out of them, and that will take thousands of years of evolutionary pressure selecting against them, which is not happening anyway. Society has evolved exponentially faster than our brains can keep up, and it will inevitably destroy us because we will hit a threshold eventually where the way we live becomes so incompatible with how our brains are meant to function that we will not be able to hold it together. We are already seeing that in skyrocketing levels of anxiety, depression, and general dissatisfaction with life. As others have said, the only ways to create the conditions necessary for the society you envision are an event that kills off a large portion of humanity and then complete and lasting dictatorial control over humanity to force a new model of society. A dystopian future similar to the Warhammer 40,000 Imperium of Man is our more likely future. Story 65. No. Humans are incapable of selfless deeds. We would need everyone everywhere to immediately drop whatever ideology they have and work together, which, as we have seen for thousands of years, is not possible for humans to do naturally. Story 66. I think waging war for humans is like mountain goats ramming each other. It is just part of our nature. We form groups, find reasons for those groups to hate other groups, and the conflict is an evolutionary impulse. Groups with higher intelligence, greater coordination, greater advantages, greater numbers, or who are just more cruel win the day. Over millennia, this has pushed human evolution to be meaner, smarter, and more resourceful. It builds bonds within the groups that survive. The best we can hope for is to displace this instinctual behavior with something harmless, but I think a world without war is a world that has successfully done away with a big part of our human nature. Story 67. Yes, but it will take much longer than I used to believe. Society may completely reset several times before we change our mindset. Story 68. Humanity is going to have to make and survive many more critical mistakes before we reach that point. It may happen eventually, but I do not think we will see it in our lifetimes. Story 69. The challenge is the lack of scarcity. Even spread out among other planets, traveling to and from places would take a long time. So while there may be more resources, there are still bottlenecks in supply. That's why they need warp drives to overcome the limitations of physical distance. That would be the biggest game changer compared to anything we have today. Also, don't forget the Federation emerged from a post-World War era where most of humanity was wiped out and on the brink of collapse when we achieved warp technology and were noticed by Vulcans. Story 70. Cultures are too vastly different for that to happen. The closest we will get is organizations like the European Union. Story 71. I would love that, but no, I do not think so. We would probably need some form of unified world government for that to happen. Part of the reason why that is even possible in Star Trek is because of space travel and 2 to 3 global catastrophic events before Starfleet is even founded. Story 72. I've always hated Star Trek-style science fiction because it is not realistic. Do you know how much labor goes into gathering the materials for a starship of that size? There is no way it is not abusive towards the common people. No, give me Warhammer, where it is fully recognized that the Imperium of Man will use and abuse you in the never-ending fight against the bloodthirsty galaxy we live in. Utopia is not real and never will be. Someone will always have to suffer for it. Story 73. Yes, despite the story of 2025, humanity is destined for wonders you would flat out refuse to believe are possible. We live in a wonderful universe full of surprises, including civilizations learning over time to coexist. Our history and immediate presence are bumpy at times. We are capable of anything we want. Our minds are incredibly powerful, and our hearts even more so. Have some optimism despite the challenging story we are in. Story 74. No. Humans are always trying to gain power over others. And not everyone has the same idea of what utopia is. One person's utopia is another person's nightmare. Story 75. Only if we meet a galactic federation of extraterrestrials that will allow us entry only if we unite. That is all I am hoping for at this point. Story 76. If we were willing to edit the genome, yes. Much of the violence is caused not by insufficiency, but by greed and envy. Reducing these in the population, assuming robots actually happen, would help. Story 77. Very unlikely. Even if humanity somehow developed faster than light travel, transporters, and replicators, the majority of humans would still be driven by greed and power. More likely, we would end up with a situation similar to what the television series The Expanse depicts, provided humanity survives that long. Story 78. There will always be scarcity. Or deposits are inherently limited. There is only so much land area available for solar panels. Only so much helium-3 exists for fusion reactors. Microwave power transfer from space has limited bandwidth and is inherently dangerous. Antimatter reactors can only reach a certain size. Even when we become celestial beings and capture the power of black holes, we will still inadvertently destroy surrounding worlds. Everything we do causes pollution. No process is perfectly efficient. Humanity will continue to grow until every available resource is saturated, and then scarcity will inevitably return. There is no escape. Story 79. Because life does not work like fiction, and we do not have a united goal as a species. If we did, it would be much more like Starship Troopers or Ender's Game. Story 80. The most unrealistic aspect of Star Trek was not the warp speed, teleporters, replicators, or tricorders. It was its depiction of human nature. No, humans will never live in peace. Story 81. Humans are still a group of large primates at heart. Nothing will change that. Humans will always try to sneak and deceive. We are intelligent, too intelligent for our own good. Story 82. No, because that is simply not how trade and necessity work. To not need money would create a form of functional slavery, because no service could refuse based on funds, and you would be unable to request anything without participating in the system that mandates service availability. Story 83. We are technically already there, but the way everything works, profit and power are more important. We are pre-World War III, which nearly wiped out the human race. The difference is that humanity perseveres in Star Trek. We might not make it that far. Story 84. It's possible. Remember, in Star Trek, 3 major events enabled that world. 1. World War III collapsed all countries and devastated the world. The utopian society emerged after that conflict was resolved. After first contact, Vulcans helped restore order. Humans realized that other life existed and understood the need to improve themselves. If society ever collapses, we could start with a blank slate. Friendly aliens arriving would likely unite us. Hostile aliens might unite us as well, but friendly ones could help us find solutions. Near limitless energy is probably inevitable. Eventually, fusion technology and direct energy capture will eliminate energy scarcity in the short and medium term. This advancement will also enable more advanced space travel. Energy-to-matter replicators. With nearly unlimited energy and the ability to replicate anything, from instruments to meals, post-scarcity is achieved. People can pursue their desires instead of focusing solely on survival. Story 85. There are several factors of human nature that we need to overcome for that to happen, notably tribalism and our tendency to worship people in positions of power. Story 86. No. Humans are selfish individuals who will never move beyond greed. Not necessarily because we could not create a perfect environment, but because it will never happen before we destroy ourselves in pursuit of it. Story 87. No, climate change will kill us. In my opinion, humans as a society have about 50 to 100 years left. Humans as pockets of tribes have about 100 to 150 years left. Story 88. Yes, of course we will. It is inevitable. The only question is how long it will take and how much suffering we will endure and inflict upon ourselves before it happens. We have survived ice ages and inflicted unspeakable pain and torture on each other for millennia, and we have emerged today closer to the peace portrayed in Star Trek than ever before. We can endure multiple nuclear holocausts and still have time to reconcile, rebuild, and reinvent humanity. It makes no sense to think that the entire arc of humanity is some cycle that cannot get better than it is now. The ego of negative posters who believe that we happen to live in peak humanity and that generations thousands of years in the future cannot do better than us is wild. That said, is it helpful to know we will get there, but it may be so distant that humanity will not resemble anything you can conceive? Is it helpful to know it is inevitable but not mutually exclusive from horrible suffering for hundreds or thousands of years in between? Story 89. No. Do you want proof? Just look at everything, literally everything. If we invented advanced manufacturing devices right this second, all that would happen is the people who produce things would lose their jobs and then starve because they cannot pay to use the devices. Story 90. No, I think war is a deeply ingrained human trait. We could evolve away from it, but in my opinion as a history enthusiast, there is a strong, almost primal need or desire to wage war to some extent. Maybe not at all levels of society, but definitely more so among those with power or responsibility. I compare it to a scaled-up version of fight or flight, if that makes any sense. I do not know if peace is possible without world peace, but I personally do not believe world peace is achievable unless we start waging war in space. Then our world could be as close to peaceful as possible. Story 91. What is interesting is that taking care of people is actually cheaper for society. It costs a great deal of money to allow homeless people to exist. That is the cruelty. Story 92. No. Why not? Mostly because the wealthy are getting wealthier and the middle class is shrinking, often becoming poor. This is unsustainable with rising costs of living. Late-stage capitalism is not enjoyable. It would take something drastic to move toward a utopia-like path, and the chances of any middle-class or lower-class group surviving such a drastic change are not realistic. Story 93. Have you seen the United States of America? It is going backwards. The top 1% own everything. Everyone else is a medical bill away from dying or poverty. Story 94. 5 years ago, an unknown disease spread across the world. Instead of everyone doing their due diligence to prevent illness and acting as basic human beings, some people resorted to threatening a governor because she advised wearing masks in public. It would be surprising if we have not destroyed ourselves before 2030. Story 95. No, unfortunately, the human condition is such that there are always those who will leech off the work of others. We see it now with social programs paid for by others to help people. But those programs are infested with people who could improve their situation to get off those social programs, but do not because they prefer leeching off the social system. Story 96. Much of Northern Europe did so for a while. No one was destitute. The intelligent had opportunities, and the weak or unlucky were cared for. Crimes of need were non-existent. Everyone who could be educated learned tolerance. Those who could not be educated were incarcerated. Then, after about 20 years, they forgot that bad people exist and started welcoming migrants, including self-identified refugees, from less tolerant cultures. You used to be able to sunbathe topless in Copenhagen, weather permitting. Now you may be harassed. If you object to this, you may be labeled Islamophobic by those who have forgotten that evil exists. Story 97. Star Trek is quite complicated if you actually get into its details. Starfleet is basically for the lucky few elite with skills and extensive training. You get access to basics with replicators, but that is it. You cannot just do what you want, build a home wherever you want, and so forth. Land is still finite. Premium locations are limited. Everything else depends on reputation, talent, connections, and so on. If you are not gifted, good luck. It is appealing as a story, but not if you are just a random person among tens of billions. There is a finite amount of research to do, farms that are needed, or teachers. You will likely live in communal housing in a megacity with a replicator and reside in a basic holographic environment. Story 98. I don't. Why? Because even if it were possible, it would mean the end of the human race as we know it. Humans have evolved to compete in every way, with other animals and now with each other. The implication in Star Trek of the utopia they enjoy in our future is that they are evolved. They look like us, but they are somehow evolved beyond us. There is never any specific reason given for this. Maybe it is simply beyond our understanding, like trying to explain how a computer works to Columbus. Maybe, if in 500 years we figure out how to evolve human beings to the point where we do not need things like power and war to give our lives purpose, then that utopia could be possible. If we are left to traditional evolution that has taken us where we are today, I do not think it will happen. Maybe in 10,000 or 100,000 years that is possible, but it is far more likely we will destroy ourselves first. However, if we figure out how to evolve ourselves to that point artificially, then it could be possible. Or that could be how we destroy ourselves. What I do know is until we learn to understand each other and agree as a group on the most important things to do as human beings, it will be impossible. You can have 1% of the population driving toward where we need to go to achieve a Star Trek-like utopia, but most people will not go along with it. Unless maybe artificial intelligence forces the evolution and all the human beings who never agree on anything have only two choices: evolve with everyone else or simply die out. Maybe we are reaching another point in human evolution like when Homo sapiens and Neanderthals coexisted. Eventually, Homo sapiens outcompete the Neanderthals and they disappeared. Maybe human beings as we know them today will be outcompete by the human beings leading the way to that Star Trek utopia. Or maybe the humans leading the way to the utopia will go extinct, outcompete by the warmongering, greedy humans, who will drive us to an even more warlike, dystopian future. I personally do not think peaceful humans who do not care about competition and dominance have much of a chance to beat anyone. But maybe I am wrong. Story 99. Star Trek was not a utopia. Most of Earth's population exists in stagnation with no purpose and no motivation. People strive and risk their lives to join Starfleet just to have a sense of accomplishment and value. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.